Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night in-depth ag forecast here on February 27th, brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I'm going to start you off going west to east across the country tonight. We're going to go first to a website here by the National Weather Service called the California-Nevada River Forecast Center. As we look across those two states, we're trying to assess how much water is in the snow. This past weekend, of course, a deep low that ran right along the coast came in here and delivered snow all the way down into Southern California. Many people down here experiencing snow for the first time, although they can see it in the mountains. It was the first time it snowed at such low elevation for a lot of folks. When you look, though, at how much water's in the Sierra Nevada, we're talking about anywhere between 30 and over 75 inches of liquid in some of that snowpack. And there's a whole lot more snow coming to this area. So for once, I'm not talking about the need for a miracle march into California and Nevada, even getting all the way over to the upper Colorado Basin. I'll show you that in a few seconds. The last time I wasn't desperate for a miracle march in the West was in 2017. So it's been a while since we've seen this. Now let's go from here over to the latest snow water equivalent map. So again, anywhere between 150 and 300% of normal snowpack here with that water, and it gets all the way over to the upper Colorado Basin. We did see with the snow that came in last week into parts of Montana, this whole region beginning to show improvements, and there's more snow coming into this area as well. I'll show you that in a few moments. But I need the Pacific Northwest. If I could make a request, I'd like to see more snowpack coming in here in March, just to see that build up back over 100%, which would just ensure the West would have a great a great water year coming forward. So apologize for my misstep there. I can hear and I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm in my basement recording, and the noise that's in the background is my sump pump. And this is the first time I've heard my sump pump run in a very, very long time. And that is because, let's go look at this here. We've kind of talked about this a lot, right? The subsurface soil moisture deficits. And I live right here in an area that still has very low soil moisture, down to about 40 inches. In fact, the whole of the upper Mississippi Basin, with the exception of maybe the very northern tributaries, getting rid of the Ohio River Valley and a lot of the Missouri River Valley, still has the remnants of last fall's drought. And as you know, that's one of the components I'm still very concerned about for this upcoming growing season. This needs to be corrected in the next 60 days, or a little bit beyond that, maybe 60 to 75 days, to really ensure that 2023 has a lower drought risk on a big section of our growing area in the midsection of the country. So to hear my sump pump running, I mean, that's that recent moisture that just came in here. That's great to kind of hear about, to hear that in the background. Well, anyway, let's get back to it now. We have another big storm system rolling down the west coast. It's come in to Oregon. Part of it's going to split north, split east. The other part's going to slide south, and that's why we have the blizzard warnings out for the Sierra Nevada. There's winter storm warnings up the west coast. And once again, we're going to see very strong winds coming out of the southern plains on very dry conditions. That's why there's red flag warning here. Now, from Wisconsin over to New England and the high wind advisories we have right now that are still in this section of the country, this is all from the first system, the one that produces severe weather yesterday in the southern plains and today into Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And there's actually a tornado watch underneath some of this as well. So this pattern remains very active for at least the next several days here. We need to kind of diagnose when that pattern is going to change in a few moments. But I want to talk about Texas, because we're going to see tonight, this afternoon, relative humidity here getting down into the single digits. And we're going to watch again on Tuesday. Watch this again. There it is. Late afternoon and evening, strong winds out of the west, but these humidity values here are dipping down to those single digits. What will be talked about again in a few moments is this. By Wednesday into Thursday, there is another vigorous wave coming out of Arizona and New Mexico that's going to eject into the the Red River Valley, and it is possibly going to set up a very, very dynamic view here of the dry line. I'm going to have to look at more of this in just a few moments with you. But that dry air that's in place here yesterday was responsible for this large dust storm. Look at this. I'll play this for you here. This is the dust that came out of New Mexico and then ripped across parts of Texas. This was some of the high-resolution satellite data we caught of it here. So let's let it catch up there. Look at that. That's just impressive to see that dust yesterday. This is the 6th dust storm I've seen down here in this part of the southern plains so far this year. Okay, let's look now at the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. So this includes the weekend storm system that came into California. It then has that storm system as it ejected last night, producing this severe weather here. And then this morning, as that low got into Illinois, over in Indiana, Ohio, see all the streaks? Those are the storms, the individual storms. To the north of it, we made a transition to snow into Wisconsin, but some storms in Iowa last night. We saw some pretty heavy rain out of this. This is all working against this. And that's what we need to be seeing this time of year. So that's just a quick look at the last 72 hours of total precipitation. Now, I mentioned this severe weather. This is the latest that we've got from the SPC. 12 tornadoes reported last night on Sunday night. And add those to the rest of the reports. We're at 218 different severe weather reports from yesterday on Sunday. And I want to show you something that was quite amazing. There was a tornado that hit Norman, Oklahoma. And they launched a weather balloon just before that happened. And so this is the mecca for severe weather is right here. Now, this, I could talk about this sounding forever. Look at the cap in this. But what I want to bring to your attention is something called storm relative helicity, SRH. Now, what many of us in the meteorological community were amazed to see was the turning of these winds, the shape of this photograph, and the fact that these storm relative helicity values, getting in the lowest 3 kilometers of the atmosphere, were well over 1,000. That's meters squared per second squared. Now, what's the significance of that? Tornadic thunderstorms can use as little as 100 to 150 meters squared per second squared of storm relative helicity to blow up. And these numbers were almost 10 times that. So these storms were spinning last night, and they did a lot of damage into the southern plains. Now, the morning sounding launched in Lincoln, Illinois, looked like this, and they launched it into a large plume of moisture, a lot of precipitation early this morning. But the storm relative helicity values were up here again in the 400 to 500 range. And our hodograph in this part of the country was almost, ideal for rotating thunderstorms. So after the rain moved through, a second pulse, a trigger came through and kicked up some more storms. And my colleague and close friend Matt Reardon took a great video of the tornado that was in Champaign that resulted from this. And this video, I'm proud of him, was picked up by several news agencies, Fox, CNN. A lot of folks were showing his content today. You got out a good chance to get out and chase that this morning. I missed it. I was in the middle of a meeting, so I'm the loser here in terms of chasing that storm. But I can talk about it in a positive note because this tornado stayed in an open field. And nothing was planted, no damage, at least that I know of right now. So it's great to see that. But just to show you here, this is where we've seen the storm reports today. So 7 tornadoes, and we do have a tornado watch that's out right now for parts of Ohio. So this storm system continued to cause some problems here. So this is what it looked like on radar. So we're just kind of watching this here as it progresses through this afternoon and this evening. And while your attention's going to go to this system, I need you to know the next one's right here in California already. And this one's going to follow a similar trajectory and eject a bit farther to the south. And that's going to be one we have to spend some time talking about here in a few moments. Because it looks like this in the vorticity map. So current low, here's the one coming into California. And you're going to notice it breaks off into 2 pieces. One went here, and the second is still diving. Now, what that second piece is going to do, so you can see the first shortwave moving across the upper Midwest. I'll show you the snow coming from this in a moment. But it's the second wave coming into California that is really going to pile up more snow into the Sierra Nevada. It then dives into Arizona and New Mexico and then ejects. And look at the change in the tilt. It goes in with a positive tilt like this. It then sweeps through, and by the time it gets over the Red River, it's almost straight north-south. And then it turns to have a negative tilt. That means that system digs and then ejects very, very quickly. Now, that particular setup is going to allow this system to rapidly intensify. And it's going to be producing a system that we're going to have to really keep an eye on. So let's come back to that in a second. First, this was 6 o'clock tonight, playing through the system that goes into New England. So you can see we have some risk of ice, snow on the northern side of it. This is not the big snowmaker for New England. I'll show you that one in a few moments. But this is the next wave coming out of California. So while that wave splits, remember, one piece goes here. Whoops. One piece slides down, the other one goes here. you're going to see snow spreading out of Montana into North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. There that is. That's the wave that ejected first to the north, while the second one still continues to spin into Southern California. And we'll look at these snowfall totals in a second, but that is a much more vigorous wave. And as it dips farther to the south, it will come out again down here into parts of the Red River of the South. Now, I want to show you the shear we're expecting this upcoming Thursday evening. So this is, again, a measure of the change of wind speed and its direction with height. And right in through this particular area and then east of there, we're going to expect to see very high wind shear values. The total difference between the surface and all the way up to where about 5 kilometers, we're going to be measuring over 110 knots of shear. That's an incredibly high value. We'll, of course, look later this week at the storm relative values. But I also want to show you that what will be very interesting to watch is, let's go here to surface moisture. It'll be interesting to watch how far to the east the dry line gets, because we look out there at that time, and this is just, that's an impressive move east on the dry line right there. That's what we're going to have to watch out for. So we'll have dew point temperatures on the backside in the single digits. They'll be in the 70s out ahead of it. And that's one of the reasons why the Storm Prediction Center has got this whole area out from eastern Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi under already. This is day 4, but it's a 30% risk of having some severe storms. And day 5, that moves over here into parts of the southeast. So this next system is quite vigorous moving through. So to see that, though, we've got to get away from the high-res NAM and go over to the GFS, which is on the left, and the European that's on the right. The models are exhibiting differences, and right now the European is outperforming the GFS by a couple of percent in terms of its skill score. But we're watching first one system leave. Here's the shortwave that goes out of Montana, right here on the border between North and South Dakota into Minnesota and Wisconsin. So you're going to see it in both models. But what we're watching is the one coming through California. Now you see that that one digs on Wednesday night. There could be some showers and storms out ahead of it right in this area. So this is coming on the front that's left behind this high pressure system here and the storm system exiting east. So we're going to watch out for those storms there. But these aren't the ones I'm mostly concerned about. This is ahead of the system on Wednesday night. Then the low ejects, and this is where we see by the time we get into Thursday evening. So the low is right here. That dry line will probably curl into this area. And you can see why the Storm Prediction Center is keeping a very close eye on this region. Now, this next system is dipping farther to the south, and the models are spreading a lot of very heavy rain through the Ohio Valley, parts of the mid-Mississippi River Valley. But you'll see that by the time we get into midday Friday, the European model is more aggressive on converting this over to snow from around St. Louis through Springfield up to northern Indiana, southern Michigan, then right here on the border between New York and Pennsylvania. The GFS isn't there. The GFS is lifting this low more quickly, as you can see. So it snows farther to the north, whereas the European's a bit farther to the south. So significant model differences here. What's trended is that in both cases, the model is trended a bit further north and west between the previous runs and this run with the position of the low. But it's robust. And as it goes into New England this Friday night to Saturday, we could be looking at some heavy snow into New England as well. Then note, we have another system coming into the west. See it right here. This is this weekend, and this one slides again and puts more snow into the western United States. That's just 1 week, all right? There is a pattern change coming. We're going to get to that in a second, but I want to give you some numbers on this. Using the 12Z European run, we could add anywhere between 60 and 100 inches of more snow into parts of the Sierra Nevada out of the next 2 systems coming through. There's good snow coming into the upper Colorado Basin, parts of Utah, as well as into Idaho as well. But the heaviest snows are going to run down the Cascades into the Klamath Mountains and again into the Sierra Nevada. Let's go east of there and come into the Midwest. Now, this is going to move around a lot. This is not set in stone. But this region right in through here is where the current European model is putting that second system and its heaviest snows. Remember, this is from the first shortwave that ejects, right? That's the one that comes out quickly in the middle of the week. This is the late week system. Now, this morning, that heaviest snow band was farther to the south. It was here. So it's moved now about 100 miles farther to the north, and I expect it to continue to move. From here, let's go look in the northeast. We've seen models increase total snow in the Northeast, but what I want you to notice is that it may be cold enough to bring the snow all the way down to New York City. It's going to certainly get into Boston, and this is going to be a lot in the interior, making up for some long-standing snowfall deficits in that area. So why don't we just back off and look at both models in comparison here. This is the next 7 days from the European model. This is the next 7 days from the GFS. So you can see the GFS for the system here is a bit farther to the north, but overall, decent comparison for the Northeast and the West. Okay? Now, next, what's the probability of getting 6 inches? So you notice that those probabilities are highest in through this area. So the ensemble models does not want to keep that more southerly snow track. It's got it a bit farther to the north in here. So if you're watching this and you're one of those snow deficit areas in Illinois, parts of southeastern Iowa or Indiana or southern Michigan, I'm just kind of giving you a clue on what I expect to see here. But the total snowfall, if we go up to 12 inches, interior of New England, and then up to 18 inches. Now we can just keep going up with this, up and up and up. And that's where we have the best chance of getting more than 4 feet of snow in the Sierra Nevada. Okay, total precipitation side of it, 10-day ECMWF run here. What I want to highlight is that these next few systems just continue to deliver a lot of rain into parts of the Mid-South. We have this severe threat that's coming out on Thursday here and Friday here, but this is total accumulated precip over the next 10 days. And when we compare it to average, now we can see who's wetter than normal and who's drier. So pause it here and have a good look at this particular map because it really shows you how the track of these next several lows is going to influence the wettest conditions versus the driest. Now we get out past this next 7 or 8 days, and we're going to start to be talking about a pattern shift. And we want to know, is it going to change maps like these? Because we've been very wet along the west coast in California, and the next 10 days continues to look that way. It's been very wet in this area. In fact, here's the chance of getting at least 2 inches in the next 10 days. But about a week ago, we saw a major reversal in the trade winds out in the Pacific. We showed it to you last week. And that's beginning to manifest itself in a more robust signal with the MJO. Now, last week I called this into question. I said I don't feel like the MJO is really behaving as if it's in phase 7 or 8. But the newest model runs, and there's a lot of model agreement here, which means I'm just going to have to bow to this and just say this seems to be what's going on. The MJO is going to pop way out here into phase 8 high amplitude. Now, what does that mean? That means that we start to increase the risk of ridging across the west and deeper troughs into the east. And that's a displacement of the pattern we have been seeing. Is it a perfect match for MJO phase 8? No, it's not. But this is a change, and it was sparked by the shift in the trade winds when La Niña just let go. Okay? So this is what we're watching. By about March the 8th, we still have kind of our last block setup delivering troughs here around this subtropical ridge. You know that for the last 3 weeks, I've been asking myself, how permanent is this southeast ridge? Well, over this weekend, I finally got an answer to that. And we watched the model trends over the weekend eventually give us this solution for about March, let's call it March 9th through probably the 3rd week of March. And we now see the atmosphere setting up into a high over low block right here. We see the jet stream preferring a southerly track, and this is going to race across the country. So I don't see a large ridge forming off the west, but I do see flow just farther to the south. That's what that trough means. So if that's the case, we've dislodged, through strong jet stream winds, the subtropical ridge. And the net effect of that is that the jet stream pattern is going to do something like this for the middle of the month. And just remember, wherever you are with the jet stream, if you're north of it, colder than average. If you're south of it, warmer than average. And we see that the jet stream position is going from Southern California to South Carolina. So that means there's going to be a lot of colder air coming in with this. And that was the big question mark we had last week. So let's go have a look at the precip first. This is all of week 2. So this would be the 7th through the 13th. We still see wetter conditions for California, Colorado Basin. And now we can also see very wet where that stronger jet stream level wind is right here. So that's some of the differences we're seeing with this newer pattern. Now watch what it does to temperatures, because so far since the start of this year, our temperature ranks by climate district. We have a lot of single digits here. And this is telling us this is near record warmth for the start of any year, going back to 1893. Now, that's done a lot to the Great Lakes. We're looking here that the Great Lakes are currently now up to 11% ice covered, but as early as last week, they were down here around 6%. So it kind of bounces around. But at one point in early February, it was the lowest ice concentration in the Great Lakes since we've been keeping records, which I believe go back to 1973. There you go. Now, what are the temperatures doing? Let's take a look at the high temperatures here. We've already experienced these on Monday. There's Tuesday. Getting into Wednesday. And remember, on Thursday, that's when this next system is coming right in through here. All right, so cold air behind it. Here's what the temperatures do by Friday. And as we get into the weekend, there's some moderation for next Sunday. But it's beyond this. Remember, it's out there past the 8th and 9th that we start to see the pattern really begin to shift. And now we're beginning to really realize that in the longer range forecasts. This is that 5-day sliding window. So this would be the 3rd of March to the 8th. Watch what happens after this. Much colder air pushes through the Canadian prairie into the northern plains, advances over the Midwest and plains, and eventually makes its way to the East Coast. And there's some thought that this is going to last into the 3rd week of March. Some of that support comes from the Climate Prediction Center, which last week they released their latest update. Sorry about that. For weeks 3 and weeks 4, which gets us out to the 24th. They just have that colder air advancing farther to the east. And if we bring the jet stream in a bit farther to the south, I don't even think this is right. There'll be wetter conditions that'll show up here as well. Now, is there support for that in the European model? Well, this was just released about a half hour before I recorded today. This is now looking at the time period of March 11th through April 10th. So that 30-day window there. And again, we see colder risk across the United States with this new pattern. And yes, that was something last week I questioned, but we've now got better evidence of how this is going to change for that time period. On the precipitation side of it, same time period, so it gets us out to April 10th. We see very wet conditions coming into the west, running through the central U.S. and hitting this region of the country. That's where the jet stream is going to live. That's where it's going to be wet. Good news about this is it's moisture for Colorado, Kansas. It's moisture less dry now for Texas than it was. So I have to say that even though I don't like the cold weather coming in, and there's a lot of you down south that want to get field work done, get going, this could be critical for the success of 2023. Okay, helping this all out is this fading La Niña. Watch, you're going through December into January, you're just going to see this thing going away. The trade winds have given up here. We now have westerly winds in this area. Warm waters emerged here, and this La Niña is fading very, very quickly. So thinking about that, I got asked a few questions like, well, what does that mean for spring? So let's do this together. I went back all the way to 1950, and I plucked out every year where we made a transition out of La Niña to ENSO neutral or El Nino. That's what we looked for, with the transition years coming out and rapidly warming. When you stitch all those together, you end up getting this pattern for the month of March, which means if there's some ridging, it's pretty far here over the Aleutian Islands, and troughs like to occupy much of the Canadian Prairie, Western United States Midwest. Do you notice how weak the subtropical ridge is in this case? Now, that could be the pattern we see through the starting at the end of the first week of March and lasting through the 3rd week of March. What we want to know, is it going to continue after that? So this is what we're going to do next. For the whole United States, all right, I went back and just looked at March average temperatures from 1895 to present. And I put a trend line here from the 1950 to present. So we're just trying to capture the 1950s all the way to the mid-2020s. Is that what it is? Yeah. And we can see that over that time period, average temperatures across the United States have increased. Now, again, it's just from this point to this point, about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm telling you that because we're going to use some analog years from the 50s, which was historically a colder time than present. And why I'm telling you that is because I went in and got all of those years, see them right here, that were transition years out of La Nina into ENSO neutral and eventually El Nino. And we said what was the average March temperature. And what you get out of that is this map right here. These colors represent colder than normal conditions. And you can see it's anchored around where that trough was that I just showed you. Now, what I want to do next, so let's stick with this and let's just say, well, what about not March, but getting into April? And when we do that, we tended to get this pattern, the cooler air advancing to the east. Now, there's a lot of folks in here that do not want to see this. We want to get into the fields early. This is just an analog year approach, and I got a bunch of years in this. So this is not exactly how this is going to play out. We're just looking at some sort of idea about what it could be. But then I want you to notice this. May. When you look at the May temperature anomalies, all of a sudden the pattern flipped and it got very, very warm. In fact, I find it interesting that 2018 is in this analog package because if you remember 2018, record cold for the Midwest April, then record warm Midwest May. And we planted a crop faster than I've ever seen anybody plant in the Midwest in history. So that's the first part of this. But can I do one other thing for you? Now, I mentioned a few moments ago, let's go back to March. I showed you that historically, the 50s was a cooler time period. Okay, and I'm using this whole time period to find my analog years. What if I were to remove those years from the 50s and the 60s? I don't know. Let's just get rid of everything up to 1968. And we say, well, what did March look like? Now what you're going to see is removing the 1950s from those analog years, there was some more warmth here. There's colder along the northern tier of the United States, but warmer here. And that actually matches much more closely to what NOAA was predicting. We say, well, what about the month of April? And we go take a look at this. And April was a cool one that followed it, but not as cool, getting rid of the 50s. And then we say, well, let's go into the month of May. And again, May, when you get rid of those 1950 years, look at the differences. So this is what using analog years can really make quite confusing. What I'm trying to share with you, though, is that we're coming out of a 3-year La Niña into ENSO neutral. So to even think that we have a clue about what April and May are going to look like at this point is folly. So we're going to have to watch this together, and that's why we do these videos all the time. All right. From here, I do need to tell you about South America because the next 15 days continue to show what we've been seeing. Wet conditions here. Mato Grosso do Sul, Goiás, Minas Gerais, this is Sao Paulo, Paraná. This area has been incredibly wet for a while. The models continue the dry trend for Argentina, and that's where the temperatures are warmest in that area. But I do want you to know that while this will continue to cause harvest delays in southern Brazil, in central Brazil, not Mato Grosso, but down here, the longer range forecast for the newly planted safrinha crop looks really quite advantageous for Brazil. In fact, we look out there from, again, that same time period, March 10th through April 12th in this case, and there's a lot of wet weather being forecast by the models. So this needs to be watched carefully because the models have continually overpredicted Argentina. So I'll keep watching it and I will report back to you, but hopefully you found this informative, at least just to give us some perspective on what we're dealing with going into the spring. I appreciate your attention and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.